Okay, it's time to start work on our second ASR33. So this is the unit that I'll be giving away once it's fully functional. It's in a bit of a poor condition at the moment, so we'll be going right through restoring and repairing all the mechanics. The case has got some damage, it's got a couple of breaks in it, but I will not be repairing that. I'll give the case a good clean and polish it and carry out a few minor repairs. But I'm going to leave the case pretty much as it is. It will look a lot better, but I'll leave it up to the recipient of the machine to finish polishing and cleaning it. But I will of course make sure it's as complete as I can. There are some bits missing. Some of the parts are fairly badly bent, so I'll get this straightened out and try and make it as presentable as I can. So step one, as ever, is to dismantle it into its major components. So we'll start by removing the case, and then we'll start taking out the individual parts. So I've got the cover removed, and we'll probably find some parts floating about in here. There's various screws that I found already. But we'll start by removing the electronics pack. So we'll just spin this around. And so, as usual, we have the electronics pack here, and what we can do is unplug this from the rest of the machine. So these connectors just come out. They are numbered, so you can't really mix them up when you put them back in. And what we can do is just disconnect all the various parts, and that will enable us to take the electronics pack out in one piece, and then we don't need to unsolder any wires or disconnect anything else. So this will come with the leads, so the external connections, the interface leads will come away with the electronics pack. And so what I'm going to do now is just take out the screws that hold this in place. So we'll take the clamp screws out for the two cables, disconnect the ground, and then I'm just going to take out the few screws that hold this in place. There's one at the front, and then there's a couple on the side, and then this whole thing should just lift out. I've taken the 4 screws out that hold this in place. We just now need to disconnect the ground connection, and this should now just lift out, so we can take this out in one piece. So I'll get this taken out, I'll untangle the wires, get this out of the way, and we can move on to the next part. So that's the electronics pack out of the way. What I can now do is spin the machine back round, and we can take out the keyboard. We can also take out the punch and the paper tape reader. And as I mentioned in the previous video when I first showed this machine, this was given to me by Phil up in Liverpool. He very generously sent it down. In fact, he brought it down, and he gave it to me completely free of charge. So I'm going to be passing on that goodwill. And as I said, if anyone's interested in this, it will be given away completely free. Obviously I can only give it to one person, so what I intend to do is to pass it on to whoever seems, in my opinion, to have the best use for this. I want to see it put to use. I don't want it put in a perspex box just to be looked at. I'd like to see it actually used. I'm going to bring it back to life, get it working, but it would be nice to see this put into some real action. Okay, so with that said, I'll get this spun around and we'll start taking out the keyboard. Okay, getting the keyboard out is fairly easy. There aren't any real direct links other than just the actuator link, and there's a kind of an H plate that links the keyboard to the actual print mechanism, and then there are 2 screws that hold this in place. I'm going to take the 2 screws out. I'll try to show this on camera. I'm not quite sure how well this will come across, but this is the actuator link plate. You can see the spring here. There's a spring clip that holds it in place, and to get this out, all you need to do is slide it against the spring, and then it will just lift up at one end and pop out. So what I'm going to do is slide it across, lift up this bottom end, and what I can then do is just grip it, pull it to the right, a bit tight, but eventually it will disconnect from the spring plate as it has done there. You can then just lift it out, and that's the link between the printer, it's a mechanical link between the printer and the keyboard. So next thing I can do is take out the 2 screws, and then this assembly will lift out of the way. Okay, so I've slackened off the 2 screws. You can actually leave them in, they are on there are slots in the keyboard, and it's easier to leave them in when you're refitting the keyboard rather than try and sort of feed them down and get them to engage with their respective threads. So before we take out the keyboard, we just need to lift these 2 tabs very slightly to ease the pressure on the cable. The cable should then just slide out, and this assembly should now slide back slightly and lift out. Sometimes it can be a bit tight. There are 2 tabs at the front that go into recesses in the bottom of the case. As long as they're not too tight, it should move fairly easily, which it has done, and then this should now just lift out. Okay, actually quite nice and clean. I will be dismantling this as ever. It is partially seized, so you can see that it doesn't really move very smoothly, and some of them, the bars, the encoder bars, don't move at all, so yeah, it will need to be taken apart, cleaned and lubricated. So I'll get this out of the way. So all we have to do with this is unclip the cables all the way around. This goes all the way to the back, of course. And then there are some screws on the underside of this. This appears to float about, but there's a single screw that holds it in place, but then there are some adjuster screws that allow you to kind of move it around to engage with the or to align with the top cover. This doesn't work properly, it's bent, so it's had quite a rough life by the look of it. There's a lot of parts on this that are bent and are going to need some attention, but I'll get the cable unclamped and the screws turned up, and we'll get this out of the way, and we can then move on to the punch. I've taken out the screw that secures the reader to the chassis. I've unclipped the cable all the way around, and now we can lift this out. There is a plate underneath this. Okay, and we can now get this out of the way and move on to taking out the punch. Okay, so as I showed in the previous restoration on my own ASR33, this comes out fairly easily. There are various ways you can take this out. You can either take the bracket off the chassis. This is an adjustment to get the punch into the correct orientation. But I'm going to disconnect that adjustment link simply because it will almost certainly need adjusting anyway. We can get the chad chute out of the way, and so what I need to do now is take out the 2 screws that hold the adjuster, and we then need to disconnect the bottom end. There's another bolt down here. It's then free to effectively lift out the connection between the selector forks on the punch and the encoder bars on the printer. It's just the drop-in connection, so each of these bars, if you can see them, just drop into forks on the end of the encoder bars. So once this is all disconnected, this punch should come out fairly easily. It's just 3 screws, one here, and one down here. This is the actuator bar, but it just lifts up, so you can just lift this up and then that will disconnect from the punch. Okay, we'll take the bottom screw out first, and then the 2 top screws. And what we should now be able to do is raise the actuator bar to disengage it, and then lift the entire punch and disconnect the levers from the encoder bars. And that is the entire punch mechanism out of the way. Looks to be in actual very good condition, so hopefully won't have too many problems with this. It won't actually move at the moment, so I'm suspecting it's just the top end. The rocker part is just in need of cleaning and lubricating, so there's some rust on the back, but the rest of it looks to be in fairly good order. So some more screws down here. These are the screws that hold the machine to the stand. So there is a stand with this, by the way. I can take this plate out. It's the filler plate behind the reader. Okay, so that just leaves the printer mechanism. Now there's nothing actually holding this into the case, it just sits in some bushings. So we should be able to lift this out without taking any more screws out. Okay, so there is another. I don't think that's part of it, I think that's just a bit of debris that's in there. So I'll get this lifted off the chassis and onto the bench, and we'll have a quick look and see what we are up against. So quick look at the chassis, and as you can see we have the usual problem with the foam that's disintegrated. Another screw. But overall it's in fairly good condition. I think it's going to clean up extremely well. I'll replace the foam and give it a good clean, check that it's not bent. I think it's fairly flat. I can't see any major problems with the chassis, but I'll have a close look at that once it's been cleaned, and if I find anything amiss I will of course let you know. Other than that I can't see any other major issues. Another piece of it there that's come from somewhere. So as I say, it's had a bit of a rough life. It's in fairly good condition, but it's got a few scuffs and scratches, but I think it will tidy up extremely well. So I'll get the chassis out of the way and we'll have a quick look at the printer. Okay, so looking at the printer mechanism, I will be replacing the rubber pad that is used to impact the print head against the paper. This is rock hard as ever. Not quite as bad as the last one I did, but still, if it's left like this it will destroy the print head. This doesn't turn, it's seized up, so I'll need to free it up. Normally it's just a combination of all the various pivots and shafts being slightly tight, and it stops the thing from turning, so hopefully by the time I've been through, tidied all that up and cleaned it, lubricated it, it will be fine. The rest looks to be in fairly good order. Platen knob is missing. This is the only part that concerns me. It's taken quite an impact, and this is bent. Probably not that clear on the video, but this is bent over, so it's been hit, and this is quite a sensitive part of the mechanism. Does require very accurate adjustment. That's what this lever here is for, and it sets the basic timing of the entire mechanism, and if this isn't right then the thing won't work. Also a bit concerning is the motor fuse, and the start relay is disconnected. If you recall from the video I posted on my own machine, the start relay was faulty and that had to be repaired, and there's also danger when the start relay fails that it can destroy the drive motor. So I've no idea if this drive motor is going to work. The rear winding is fairly dark, which is the main thing that concerns me with this machine, but we'll get to that in a future video. The answer back unit hasn't been encoded, so this is when you issue the who are you command from a remote machine. These teletypes, if this unit's fitted, it is an option, and if it's fitted, this can be configured to reply with a certain code, so you know who you're talking to. And this is encoded essentially by snapping off various fingers from this drum, but they all seem to be intact. So although the option's fitted, I don't think it's ever been set with a code, which is quite nice. It means that there's nothing missing off here. The rest of it seems to be fairly good. Okay, the distributor needs cleaning. but again, it doesn't look too bad. There's no serious arcing or pitting on there, it's just dirty, so that should clean up fairly well. Okay, the encoder bars seem to be all stuck. Another machine doesn't turn. I've tried turning it previously and it doesn't move, so hopefully that, as I say, is just a combination of various parts of it needing cleaning and lubricating. So that's it for this video. In the next video in this series, what I'll be doing is cleaning up and checking the chassis, and then we'll move on to this mechanism, go through it and see if we can get it to free up and start performing the way it's supposed to. It actually looks to be in reasonable condition, but you can't really tell how much damage there is on these until you start trying to power them up and run them at speed. Quite often you'll find these will work fine if you just crank them slowly by hand, but as soon as you try and power them up, if something's sluggish or sticking or bent, then it can either do a lot of damage to itself or just not work. So it should be quite an interesting series. If you are interested in this machine, then leave a comment. As I say, I'm going to be giving it to whoever seems to have best use for it, but it doesn't